Hi everyone, today we are finally comparing the Oppo Find X9 Pro versus the Vivo X300 Pro. Let's put these head to head and see which one comes out best when it comes to the camera, which is always a very interesting battle. Let's find out in this video. Hasselblad versus size, Oppo versus Vivo. Two different approaches when it comes to the camera, yet they can have some similar aspects as well. Now, when it comes to this comparison, I will be mostly using master mode on the Oppo. That's honestly where Oppo comes alive. For Vivo, we do have of course the humanistic mode, but it isn't the same, of course, because of the adding of blur. Therefore, it's not a fair one-to-one, but if you do want to have a lot more character and depth in the shot, that's definitely the mode that I would use. With Vivo, naturally, you can also use raw lighting. It has far less processing, but with a comparison like this, I'm not using it. But I will be making a separate video on the styles of Vivo, but also this raw lighting, because I think it truly matters to enhance the experience on devices like that. So let's compare the two and see how both of these stack up against each other. So let's start with the main sensor with a small focal length difference. It's 23mm for Oppo and 24 for Vivo. Honestly, not much in between. It's a 50 megapixel resolution for both, but also both a 1/1.28 inch sensor size. Now, between these two you can see a big difference. Now, naturally I do have a bit of a custom setup on the X300 Pro with less saturation, more contrast and of course not as much sharpening as well. All phones honestly should have this feature, so you can make it more of your preference. And I think this is the best feature to have on any phone. But there is a big difference between the two every now and then. But I also want to highlight the bit of the issues that I can have with Oppo and Vivo. Sometimes with Vivo things can be too warm compared to reality. But with Oppo on the other hand, it can have way too much saturation in the blue skies. Where because of it, the whole image can look a bit off in my opinion. This is why I say Oppo will do really well in Iceland. So be sure to subscribe, so hopefully someday we can go there. That being said, color-wise and contrast, I still think Oppo does really well. With my genuine question on which one is your favorite out of these two with the shots that I've shown so far and of course at the end as well. Because I always say, when it comes to photography, preference is really key. And it's a reason why I always say, like what you like, instead of being told what to like. Now, before we start talking about the Periscope results, there is an important note to have, especially with comparisons like these. The Vivo X300 Pro uses an 85mm equivalent focal length. We're not discussing here the difference in sensor size, that's just their capabilities, but the focal length difference is something that you have to keep in mind, because when it comes to the Vivo X9 Pro, it uses a 70mm equivalent focal length. Those differences do matter, and it's something that you have to keep in mind when it comes to a comparison like this. To get the same focal length as the X300 Pro on the Oppo Find X9 Pro, I will need to crop in and therefore hurt the image quality of it. So do keep that in mind when it comes to a comparison like this, that focal length difference really matters. And therefore I would say I'm not going to focus too much on having that same equivalent focal length because it's unfair to the Oppo Find X9 Pro. So with that out of the way, let's look at the difference in terms of the periscope. When it comes to the periscope, we do have a pretty big difference. As stated, the difference in focal length, but also the sensor size. It's a 1/1.4 inch sensor size on the Vivo, but honestly still a quite respectable 1/1.56 inch sensor size on Oppo. Both are sharing that 200 megapixel resolution, which again I feel like they need to cool down on, and I much rather have a 50 megapixel resolution. We have an f-stop of 2.1 on the Oppo and an f-stop of 2.7 on the Vivo. Again, honestly, we see the same results when it comes to the colors, both honestly needing compliments to have a main sensor and periscope well calibrated together in terms of that color. Though I do feel like with Vivo things can be a bit more detailed. Not talking about sharpness here, because sharpness and details aren't the same, but it just looks like there's a bit more details attained on the Vivo. That being said, I don't think Oppo is far behind it, but it can look a lot flatter in comparison. And while realistically both are excellent in their own right and own approach, I will be honest, I think when it comes to Oppo, I prefer the X8 Ultra over the Pro in terms of results what we get in daytime photography. Because while the colors are similar to the main sensor on the Oppo, in terms of the contrast, Oppo isn't doing the same as the main sensor, and it can really affect the depth of the shot itself, where shadows kind of disappear in comparison, and therefore lacking a bit of that contrast that adds depth to the shot. Now for the ultra-wide, they are perfectly the same. They both have a 50 megapixel resolution, both have an f-stop of 2.0 and both 15mm equivalent in terms of its focal length. And yes, both have the same 1/2.76 in sensor size. There is no difference here in terms of numbers. It's all going down to how they process the images. The ultra-wide, yet again, is one of those least used sensors because of often coming with a compromise, being a smaller sensor. But I also find that for my style of photography, it doesn't work that well. But there are genuine moments where it really matters to have a good ultra-wide, even for my style, including beautiful nature. Sadly, I'm not at the Alps or Scotland. Subscribe to make that happen. But again, a compliment to both when it comes to the colors. They have the same look as the main sensor when it comes down to that, though naturally with a quality loss. But what you can see is that same trend where the Vivo can be a bit too warm, where with the Oppo that blue saturation in the sky and a little bit of a green tint in some cases. But with it being basically perfectly the same sensor, there's very little to add here apart from the differences in processing. Vivo tends to be a bit brighter and lighter in most situations, and when you get inside for the Church of Arnhem, you will see a little bit more depth on the Oppo in these cases, with a bit darker shadows and a bit of a difference in the way that it handles the colors as well. I think both are perfectly fine, but naturally, as stated before, when you come from a device like the Vivo X200 Ultra and the sensor size it uses on that ultra-wide, it's hard not to see the difference. And that also counts for using a phone with a lot wider ultra-wide, like the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. Stay tuned on a video on that. Macro photography is something I would often do with flowers to get really that beautiful bouquet in the background and just to get something that is really colorful in the shot. But with it being winter, those flowers are pretty much gone, having a very limited possibility to showcase that. Now, both are using the Periscope, but I will say from the get-go that the Vivo has a superior finding focus, because every now and then it really struggles finding its focus, and even after sometimes it then struggles to find a normal focus point as well, something that is in the distance. But when it comes to macro, that definitely affects it, and manual focus is needed. While it can also happen with the Vivo, it's far less frequent. And then there are some other things. The Oppo does have a better minimum focus distance when using their Periscope. Not by a lot, but while using manual focus, the Oppo just gets a little bit closer. But in turn, AI can be pushed a lot more on the Oppo, especially when things are getting a little bit harder. Instead of looking like a shot, it looks made. It's not often, but it can happen in some shots, like I said, where it's a lot more difficult to get the shot right. And in cases, it can also oversharpen a lot. Portraits are a struggle for me. Not only am I asking a stranger if I can get a portrait of them, but also in my struggle, I see a whole vision in my head on how to shoot the person, the lighting, the reflections that I can create, the shadows. But a setup like that would take time and therefore costing them time. And I really don't want to take up a lot of time of a stranger. It makes it really hard in combination with also my introvert nature. Lucky, in Germany I had a guy I could shoot a bit of shots of, but that was with a lot of phones quickly trying to get a setup of all of them. So sadly you do have to deal with some more shots of myself. Not the nicest model, I'm sorry. And to add on top of that, when I did finally ask someone, I took my shots with the X200 Ultra instead of the X300 Pro. So here a bonus for you. The X200 Ultra versus the Oppo Find X9 Pro. Okay, 60 frames per second on both the Oppo Find X9 Pro and the X300 Pro. Let's see a little bit of depth when I zoom in on this. Again, of course, different focal length, so we gotta keep that in mind. Looks a little bit more depth on the Vivo. Actually, quite a decent bit. On the phone, at least. It's natural with such a huge sensor. Random tent. Alright, let's go to the ultra wide. I'm impressed with it. The X300 definitely responds a little bit faster as well. Let's test it out again. Yeah, the X300 definitely is smoother in its transition. Like you get a little jolt on the X9 Pro in comparison to the X300 Pro. Alright, both recording in lock now. Let's see the difference, because I did feel when it comes to the X300 Pro, lock is better. Like the Vivo looks a bit more processed. Also less noise in RAW files with the X9 Pro, which naturally isn't what you should want from it. As in, you don't want the noise to be removed in RAW files, just to clarify. Now, I can go to the ultra-wide raw recording log on the X9 Pro, where I cannot with the X300 Pro. Okay, 4K 60 frames per second front-facing camera. Straight away, the X300 Pro definitely is a lot sharper. Again, that isn't detail, sharpness isn't detail, but you can definitely tell that difference. More contrast, where the X9 looks too balanced, like it lacks contrast and therefore lacks depth. I look a lot flatter on the X9 Pro compared to what I get on the X300 Pro. Yeah. 4K 60 frames per second on both the Oppo Find X9 Pro and the Vivo X300 Pro. Starting with the main sensor, let's look at the light source. The Oppo definitely is doing it better. The Oppo is also having, it's a little bit too dark, but it gives more of that night feeling. Looking at the light sources here, I would say Oppo slightly, yeah, but not much. And I'm purely judging that on that. Here the Oppo is definitely having more overexposure. It took a little bit longer to find the right balance here. Ultra wide on both. It's really hard to judge, but it looks like the Oppo has a little bit more details at the bottom left of it. But more overexposure on the light sources. Okay. Let's walk for a moment. Bit of that star effect that I really like around my light sources. Now we're gonna zoom in a little bit. Right here. Right. 3 times versus technically 3.7 times. So 85mm versus 70mm. Let's look at the person. We can go 6 times. I don't know how much that is in terms of flex zoom, but definitely leave it up. Oh, let's go back a little bit. Let's get it somewhat comparable. So 150? Probably. That looks about the same. Took a little bit for the Oppo to move there. Like on my phone itself, it looks very jarring on the Oppo. Like it's really looking jarring. Where the Vivo is much smoother in movement. I don't know if after the fact it will have the same, but definitely that's a big difference. And look at the. Let's go to their native zooms again. Oppo is a lot darker. Light sources look a little bit better though. For a really proper side by side with the main sensor shortly. And then let's zoom in as well. Again, to make it really visible what the difference is. And ultra wide. Again, Vivo is just quite a lot smoother with transitioning from lenses. Although that one wasn't as smooth. Alright, front facing camera on both, and maybe the display calibration is different, but that doesn't look great on the Vivo X300 Pro. I look way too yellow. I don't know what is up with that, but on the Oppo I definitely look too red. The Vivo is also brighter. And also a bit too red. Like there's a little bit of green tint in the Vivo as well that I don't like. Both not great, but fine. I mean, for me, I don't use it that much, but yeah, just for yourself naturally. So that was my comparison between the Oppo Find X9 Pro and the Vivo X300 Pro. Both are excellent in terms of camera, but with a very different approach. And yes, there are situations where I prefer the X300 and there are situations where I prefer the X9 Pro. One thing I definitely prefer the X9 Pro over is the battery life. Battery life simply is just a lot better when it comes to the Oppo Find X9 Pro compared to what you get on the Vivo X300 Pro. The X300 Pro has good battery life, but when it comes to the physical limitations that the X300 Pro has compared to the Oppo, you cannot deny that battery life simply will be better on the Oppo. And I think there Oppo has done an excellent job. In terms of camera, it depends a little bit on what you are looking for when it comes to the camera. I will, however, say, I said it a few times in the video, I think that I still prefer the X8 Ultra in daytime photography when it comes to the camera over the X9 Pro. But it isn't by much by any means. There are just situations where I feel like the X9 Pro just lacks a little bit in comparison. Either way, let me know what you thought about this video and this comparison and which one has your pick out of the two. Now, before we leave, I really want to thank my members as well. Thank you so much for the support. And of course, if you want to become a member, you can by clicking join below and become a member as well. So you get some raw files. For instance, in this comparison, I made some raw shots as well, so you can check those out. Those are only available for personal use and of course my members. Anyway, I do hope that you enjoyed this video. And of course, if you did, don't forget to like, subscribe and everything. And of course, again, a special thanks to Garrett for allowing me to use the X9 Pro to check out for this video. And of course, allowing me to make this comparison. Anyway, have a good one and talk to you guys in the next.